All right, we are recording. Welcome to our next Digital Demos Zoom edition, this time featuring the work of Hutten Moyer and also the commentary and work of Kyle Chang. First, want to thank Hutten and Kyle for giving us their time today. I want to thank all of you for showing up. I think it shows how much of a robust community we still are, no matter what, and we are going to hang on to that, and we are going to fight to keep the things that we find so important. So thank you for coming to Digital Demos on Zoom. Please, if you have requests, if there's skills you want to learn, if there's something cool that you want to share, we're going to start working on doing these both synchronously and asynchronously. That's why we're recording today. So if you have something you want to share that's even like a 10-minute cool tool, get in touch with me. You and I can do a recording, and we can arrange to have it posted for other people to get value out of. Digital Demos is directed for the needs of students by the request of students with student experts. That's what it was envisioned of back when we started. And so if you all join me in having some digital pizza right now, I will figure out how to get better pizza to you in the future. Today, Hutten Moyer, who is the 2012 Stewardson Fellow and competed in the Stewardson competition for that fellowship. It is a 10-day closed brief, which means you don't know what it is that you're designing. You get 10 days to work on it by yourself, solo, and send it in to be juried. It was juried in the first week of March before, well, we could still have those types of things. And out of, I think, like 40 plus entries, Hutton's was judged to be kind of the most engaging, that addressed all of the various issues of sustainability, buildability, poetry of the space, clear idea, and actually the idea of a cohesive timeline, because the element of time was a very important part of the function. That's what we're going to be going over today. Kyle's also going to provide us some questions and commentary, and we'll get into it. All right, so we are recording now. I'm going to throw it back to Hutten. I'm going to mute myself. Hutten, thanks for being here today.
Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for showing up, too. All right. So I'll jump right into sharing the screen and talking a little bit of the prompt. So the prompt was to create a fire watchtower. A watchtower is essentially something that's going to be erected on top of a mountain and looks out for potential fires within a forest. In this case, it was a national forest over in California. But the whole idea of it being a timeline was that once this fire tower burns down, it becomes a memorial. That's something that could be appreciated later on by hikers and whatnot. So jumping into the initial concept, the idea was, what is that process? What does it look like when a forest is ravaged by fire? So in the case, I looked at like a tree, a carnivorous tree, a pine tree essentially. And it was like, okay, so what does a pine tree look like, when it's full of life? And then what does it look like after a forest fire? And essentially you get these large charred members. Some of the trees actually fall down, but there's a significant amount that actually stay erect. And, it looks really desolate, really skeletal-like. So the idea was, how do I recreate that? It was just simple, like, how can I take this notion of a tree, what it looks like after a forest fire, how can I recreate that in a structural architectural method, right? So moving forward into the actual diagrams, it was like, what's the best way to explain it? Something that I've always not always, I shouldn't say always, but something that I'm really trying to force myself into is the idea that architecture is done in a few simple moves, or easily understood architecture, or anything is done in a few simple moves. So the idea was, how do I take this structure? How do I elevate it? Because it has to be elevated, as it is a tower. And then how do I create it that it resembles in some way, shape, or form the surrounding context? So it was a matter of just defining the path, because it is on a skinny trail on top of a mountain, and then raising that to actually resemble the other mountains around, so resembling the crest, and then providing a screen. And that screen came from an idea of, how do you create protection, but how does it still stay transparent, right? And also, that was also a play off of the needles in a pine tree. So, you know, you have all these needles everywhere in a pine tree, and then it actually creates some type of refuge for, you know, different birds, some type of animals, I don't know, any forest animals. So how do you recreate, yeah, how do you recreate that, right? And then this kind of gave a fun opportunity to say, like, it's for the breeze, for breeze access, right? There's a base, because there was a refuge component. You know, what if there's people up here and it does burn down, and where do they go? You know, if there is a forest fire, where do they go? So that's what that was supposed to act as. And then what I think the most fun part is the charred memorial aspect is once everything burns down, you're left with these giant charred columns, which are made out of glue lamp beams. So I thought that was a nice little tribute. Also in the prompt, it was based off of the gnome, I believe. Kyle, can you correct me on?
Yeah, that was the name of the competition, was like the gnomon, which is a dial that will pretty much read the angle of the sun to tell like what time of day it is, and I think the like what time of the year it is as well. So some people kind of incorporated that in design. Could you
up in the sundial? That's
yeah. Could you speak towards like, so you're explaining this idea and kind of like where the chart elements come from, like when in your process, like, did you come up with this idea? And in the grand scheme of things, I don't know if everyone knows, but this competition is like is a 10-day competition. So you have 10 days to you're handed the prompt on the first day, and then you have 10 days to come up with the idea and then develop all the graphics to go along with it. So maybe just speak a little towards that.
Yeah, so Kyle and I, we actually, when we were given this brief, it was the night after we came out of a separate competition for AIS. So we were pretty tired, I want to say. So when we got the brief, everyone was always hyped up, and we had conversations about this before, like, you know, take your time going into the project. And I was certainly excited. I was certainly excited to get started on it. But at the same time, I was exhausted from the previous project that I just did with Kyle. So the first day, I didn't even look at the prompt. I just let it sit there. And then it wasn't until like later the next day at night, where we're in the afternoon, where I actually felt comfortable looking at the prompt. I sat down and just thought about, you know, what's a contextual tie to a project. There's a fire tower near my place where I grew up, and we always like to sneak up on there. So it was really fun to kind of have that memory of what it's like to actually be in a fire tower and what it's like to be surrounded in nature. So it was like all these kind of feelings, emotions, ideas of inspiration. What would it be? What would be something that I would like to enjoy in the space? So like all these things are going together, and it really just came down to the pine tree. That's where it all stemmed. And this was a really quick concept that I sketched out. These aren't the like original sketches, but pretty darn close. Scanned them in. So this is actually the scan. And then I brought it over onto the actual board, did an invert. But, you know, it really just started with the concept sketch. And then from there, mapping out what are some of the visuals that can help portray this project. And there's a lot of things that, you know, I didn't know what to do when I first started. I knew I'm a very visual person, as many of us are, but I knew the type of perspectives, or what are some of the visuals that I wanted to glimpse as a hiker that's coming up on this woods. So that's why I placed, you know, this large perspective up the front on the top of the board, because I want that to be the first thing that people are experiencing, you know, or, you know, it's one of the really impactful moments that these people are experiencing when they're coming to a project like this.
Right.
But
yeah. Oh, sorry.
No. I was just going to say, but like some of these other images, I kind of had to, I was struggled for a little bit. I wasn't really sure how to portray what does it feel like to be inside, because a lot of these images, such as this one in this bottom left, you know, you're at an arm's length away from this. And that's great for like these really cool perspectives that you might see on Instagram or Pinterest and whatnot. But a lot of architecture is like, what's it like to actually feel like to be inside the space, right? So I have to say, like, these two perspectives down here was a little bit more difficult to compose and really just finalize on something that I was happy with. But yeah, with that being said, let's jump into diagrams. Kyle, did you have anything else to say?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, like, the question always comes across with this competition in particular is like, you know, do you really focus on the idea and spend all your time coming with the idea and then just kind of throw the graphics together last minute? And then there's approaches like Hutton's where he spent a really, really long time fine-tuning the graphics. And I think the benefit in that is, especially with this competition, is those who really represent the experience of this place and what it feels like to be at the top of this mountain in the middle of the forest in California. Those are going to automatically move ahead past like all the other submissions, because ultimately by representing and capturing the experience of that place, you're responding to what the project is asking for in that sense. And in doing so, you can start to, you know, it's a balancing game between like what the brief is asking and your own personal goals and what you hope to achieve in your design. Like Hutten was saying, like what he would like to experience or feel being in this place. And both of those things really go hand in hand in making a project excellent.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really just having fun with a project. And if it's something that you're happy with and having fun to do, then it shows. It allows you to make really impactful imagery. Whether, you know, there's certain design, like looking back at this design, there's a lot of things that I would change, but I was into it. I was committed to it. And I was, you know, I was like, I have to run with it. I have to make it look as good as possibly can, even if it's something that I don't agree with in terms of certain design elements. Like, yes, there has been iteration going through with it, but, you know, looking at the screen, I would change it from a vertical to a horizontal, little things like that. But at the end of the day, I was having fun with it. That's what it really comes down to. And I think it will show in a lot of people's projects if they have fun with it. So jumping into, I guess, kind of like the diagram workflow. I mean, you saw the Partee sketch. This was really just taking a quick sketch, scanning it in, doing some levels on Photoshop just to make it pop a little bit, right? And then bringing that over. Next, we'll look at the diagrams. So I love B-arc Ingalls or big diagrams. I know that's a style that a lot of us try to emulate in some way, shape, or form. So I feel like that's the best way to tell some of these like simple moves or simple like geometric shifting and pulling and that nature. So looking at this one, it starts off with three-dimensional, I guess, Arctic view from Rhino is what I took this from. And this is from like an AXO perspective, right? And coming over with some line work. I believe this line work was just a make 2D from Rhino, brought into Illustrator, touched up a little bit, just so you could get the line work thick enough that it could be seen. And then coming in and outlining with just a pen tool, coming in here with a black pen or a black brush and outlining what's important. What are the things that you're trying to point out, right? I came in here with a color fill on the columns. And then I started to show the topo line just so it gives a little bit more of a context of what's actually going on in this Partee. And if you look, and when the topic of process is, I put the diagram in here, and I felt like there's something that could still be added. And this was a very last minute decision, was actually putting the shadows in here and dropping a 5 p.m. sun, just to get more of an idea that, you know, what's it feeling like to be in this space during afternoon or sometime, or during afternoon or evening, and what are the shadows portraying, right? So in this, the whole concept was, all right, you have these vertical trees or charred members that are left, but then the shadows represent all the trees that were fallen. So it was this idea of how do you try to make every piece of every visual, make it poetic in some way, shape, or form. And again, that didn't happen until, you know, the last day for submission. So it was like a last minute decision. Okay, so jumping into the top render, there's a lot of Photoshop files, but it really comes down to organization and process. So this photo here is composed of probably about 30 different photos, but 100 different Photoshop layers. But in order to talk about like process, it's again talking about what's this idea of the approach. One of the key things that I love in architecture, and something that really, I guess, makes me love the concept of exploring buildings or exploring spaces, is just the idea of curiosity. And what can architecture portray? Can it stimulate that sense of curiosity in individual or user? So the idea of like turning this corner, you know, you're walking up, sorry, I'm gonna jump back to this board, but you're walking up on this path, right? And you make this turn, you're getting glimpses of this structure up here, and then you turn the corner and you see this, right? And it's the idea of like, I want to explore that. It's almost like a tree house, right? It's, you see this wood structure and it's like, I want to go up and climb in that. So it's really just, all right, I know the perspective that I want. I know the angle that I have to get to kind of portray that image. So you just get a glimpse of this thing. But now the fun part, or the hard part, is filling in the context. And unfortunately, there wasn't like a one winning image that I could just drop this in. So I realized I had to come in with some matte painting. And this is essential when it comes to kind of like your process of perspectives. This all started when I Googled, you know, matte painting for video games and what is it, some like movie concepts where they actually have matte painters like painting really quickly just on Photoshop, just to convey an image. And this is essentially what you do. You just take you know, your model shot and start painting. You know, where's the foreground, where's the midground, where's the background, and trying to make an outline for yourself, right? So next, this is showing some of the Photoshop work coming in, looking at the mountain ranges, looking at what is the foreground looking like, you know, dropping in some people just to get a sense of scale. And then jumping into this, I'll drop some of the layers. Like I said, there's quite a few that, okay. Okay, group. Bear with me, guys. I'm sorry.
It's all right. While you're looking through that, one thing that Hutt and I have talked about is when you're composing an image for a perspective, say you have like a really good image and it's the perfect image. So Hutton's saying like, you know, this image is composed of like 30 different images. And I think when it comes down to site and place, if it's somewhere that you've never been before, it becomes a lot more believable that you're kind of composing this experience if it's something that's composed from like the stitching together of multiple images, because it just shows that you've put in that extra thought for how it should look and how it should feel.
Yeah, so in order to compose this image, I had to get a lot of kind of contextual shots. So I'm happy you said that, Kyle, because we were talking about how this image right here, if I did not have this image, and this was just found on Google, I probably wouldn't have the perspective that you see here, right? Because I used this image and just these mountains in a variety of different layers. So if you start to see like I'll start turning off separate layers, and you'll start to realize that this is a collage, like a collage of different images just blended together.
Yeah, and another thing I'll point out is that image that Hutten just showed is not actually, actually it might be, but it's not really like where the site is.
I think it's.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's close.
But like so yeah, those are the images that were provided to us with the brief. So that's like, you know, that's them saying this is what this place is, but the images you use when you're composing your visual don't necessarily have to be those same images. They can really be anything, and it's like up to your creativity to kind of piece together what it should look like.
So here's an awesome example.
I had a quick question, Hutten. When you're figuring these renderings out, are you touching them multiple times? Like, are you iterating through like the whole set, or are you just finishing one and then moving on to the next one?
That's a good question. In this case, it was just finishing one, moving on to the next one. You know, it's I get to a point where I get so caught up in a single image that I could spend a lot of time on it. Yeah, I try to focus all my time on one image at a time, just so I'm not, you know, getting sidetracked or distracted. Because the moment you start to try to juggle multiple things at once, that's when I realize I start to get overwhelmed with things, and I really have to just get into the zone on one single thing. And I think that's when kind of the creativity really starts to flourish.
Did you have like a plan though about like how much, like where you wanted kind of stuff to be, or how it was going to get laid out, or how much time, where you wanted to spend the time that you had while you were in the zone?
Yeah. So the design, actual design was a day. I took a day to do that, right? And yes, there were iterations with how it was supposed to be laid out. And I tried to allocate just the 2 days for design and actual construction of the model in Rhino. So during that, it was a matter of like, you know, do I want this? At first I had 2 stairs, right? The stair was wider. There's another stair going down. The stairs on the refuge portion, that wasn't there. So there is iteration as I'm going through this, you know, saying like, what makes more sense? What looks better? What's easier to do? What conveys the message? So I allocated 2 days for that. And then once I had that, I laid out the board. Laying out the board is crucial for any presentation. Just deciding like, how do I want this to read? What's the hierarchy of the project? What's the hierarchy of the story? So I knew I wanted to have this perspective here. I didn't necessarily know I wanted these 2 perspectives, but I knew I wanted this one. You know, what's it look like going up the mountain? And then it was a matter of sketching out, unfortunately I don't have those sketches, but sketching out the dimension of the board and kind of laying out some of the graphics, where some of the graphics would go. And then, yeah, it really was just a plug and chug at that point, where every day I set a goal saying like, okay, I want to have the diagrams done. Okay, I want to have one perspective done. Things like that. And when you have a project that you're confident in terms of you're having fun with it, it's easy. It's really easy. Like I didn't really get stressed out over this. I knew I took plenty of breaks. I spent a lot of time not working on this, where, you know, I was able to take a step back and just think like, okay, I'm not overworking myself, but I'm setting deadlines and I'm setting goals for myself. And when you have a project that, you know, you just do it, it makes things a lot easier, that you're not second guessing yourself about certain decisions that you're doing, such as like the plan. And like I said, looking back at it, there's plenty of things that I would like to change, but when you're in that moment and when you're in that crunch time, you don't have time to change it. You just have time to do it, you know, and go forth with whatever you. That sounds really corny. I sound like a Nike commercial right now.
But you're saying you're taking breaks, but also like you're building on the experience that you have from 5 years of knowing like how to pace yourself, like how you need to like organize your time, how long of a break you need to take, that kind of stuff.
For sure. I mean, it didn't happen overnight. That's
right.
It'd be silly to say like you're out of, with the snap of the fingers, you're going to know when to take a break. It's time management. That's what it comes down to. There's a lot of times that I failed at time management where I thought I had more time when I really didn't. It took a lot of failure to get to a position that I feel comfortable starting a project and knowing how to pace myself, when to do something, when, like, just as important, when not to do something. Because if I'm not in the right mind, or if I'm not in the right mood to do something, it's not going to be good work, you know? And that's the stuff that when I look at it later, it's like, oh, why did I do that? Like, why didn't I just take the time to do it correctly? Things like that. But a lot of the stuff you see here is, you know, this is the type of graphic style that I always liked and tried to work towards all throughout my time at the school. Like the whole photorealism kind of look, the punchy, bold, big style diagrams. These are graphics that I try to portray in all my projects. So again, this is a style that I've worked through for the past 5 years. And Kyle, maybe you could talk about that, how, you know, you'll start to realize that a lot of people have different styles, and a lot of the times you look at a board or a presentation and be like, yeah, I know exactly whose board that is. So it'd be foolish to think like, okay, if you're going to try to compose, you know, a 100+ layer Photoshop, like in the next week, it's crazy. You know, it takes time to do. Maybe this is really easy. So like, this is where it all starts. It's just matte painting. But over time, you could get to a quality of work that you're proud of. And I personally like photorealism. That's just something that I've always been infatuated with. But I'm not saying that's the route you have to take. Like, there's diagrammatic sections, there's diagrammatic perspectives that are equally, if not more beautiful, that tells a message like really well. There's a lot of things that could go wrong with photorealism, and there's, you know, and I hear that a lot, but that's just my style. And
yeah, and at the end of the day, it's just you know, you're communicating an idea, and like Hutten said, there's like a lot of ways of doing that, and there's a lot of ways that people will receive information. And so with the Stewardson, you know, it's a board. In most of our studios now, we're creating these like 100 slide long presentations. And now I'm speaking directly to the freshmen. You guys are in a position where you're creating presentations of a design for one of the first designs of the building you've ever done. So you're handling a lot of challenges in that regard. And I know we've talked in my section about the difference between a board, a portfolio, and a presentation, and the way that influences your process about going about it, and how you develop your graphics. And so I think this might be a good point to transition to the Woods Hole, unless you have more for Stewardson, Hutten.
I mean, I don't really have too much for Woods Hole. I'm not sure. Woods Hole is.
I was just gonna show the board and then
okay.
show the presentation we did after, because we did a board and then we like broke it into the presentation format, but it's the same information.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe that's not the best jump. We could do more.
I think that'd be great, guys, because actually I was about to ask Hutten the question, what would it look like if you were to present the Stewardson as a series of slides? Like, how would you tell that story? And your project for that would be perfect. So, because again, I just want to highlight a couple of things that you said, Hutten. It's about an idea. It's about conveying the idea and trying to figure out the means to convey that idea. The photorealistic renderings that you have are very detailed, but that comes with experience. But you can get a sense for what you learned when you were starting, what the earliest types of, right? It starts with sketches. It starts with some basic kind of geometry. It starts with some matte painting. Those steps are relatively easy and are doable. Like your foundation technique you started 5 years ago as a freshman. So I think it's relatable at all of these levels. It's just that you can see that as you pursue it, you're getting better at it. So you're bringing your higher level of technique to the finer kind of detail points of what it is that you're creating.
Certainly, a lot of the foundation is based on sketching. Like everything that you see here was some form of a sloppy sketch in some way or another. There's something else that you said that sparked. It was actually what you said, I think last semester, Andrew, where you said, show me here, and show me like here. So it's like, if it's a section that you're trying to convey an image or trying to convey a message, show me it in section, show me it in axo, and show me it in diagrammatic form. So that was one of the things that I tried showing in multiple ways. It's just the idea of columns, but yeah, I just wanted to touch up on
Well, it reinforces the idea, and you're never sure what is going to resonate with your audience. So you want to provide them, you want to provide them many different ways to approach your idea so that they can understand it using the information that's best for them. So.
Yep. All right, so Kyle, if you want to jump into Woods Hole.
Sure thing.
Are you going to share the screen?
Yeah, yep. I'm slower than most.
In the meantime, I'm going to ask a question from Callie in the chat. Over time, we've learned more and more programs. What and when did you decide this is my program and I'm going to master it? Like whether it's Rhino or V-Ray, Photoshop. Do you still hop around to different programs like Lumion? So how do you make those decisions and how do you try out new software?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. Considering that Rhino, we all were taught Rhino right off the bat, right? And that's been a quick program for modeling, conceptual modeling. And then like we transition into Revit, right? Because that's more of a professional BIM software. In a position like this, when it's a quick hitter, you don't want to use a tool that will slow you down. So it was Rhino. It's definitely Rhino. Anytime I'm trying to do something conceptual, it's Rhino. Or if it's something that I really have a lot of control over, it's going to be Rhino or SketchUp, no matter what you choose. I've been a big V-Ray guy. I've always used V-Ray. And it wasn't until about, I think, end of third year, Lumion came out. Lumion and Enscape came out. And I saw one of my classmates using that. And after I spent a whole day working on 2 renders, I can attest for this one. I spent a whole day working on 2 renders that were like, okay, they're cool, but like, I was infatuated with them when, everyone else will look at them and be like, okay, cool. But, and I see my classmate who's banging out renders, literally 10 renders in the matter of like 30 minutes using Lumion and Enscape, either one of the two. And that's when I kind of just like stood there and realized, oh my gosh, I'm working in the past. People who Ray are working in the past if we're looking for quick iteration and quick turnaround, right? So it was then when I decided to try that, and everyone says like it's really easy to use Enscape, really easy to use Rhino or Lumion, and I didn't really have the opportunity until I started working at a company who they used Enscape as their main platform for showing visuals, and practicing that, working in that, realizing that it's not the best graphic quality compared to V-Ray, because sometimes V-Ray has a bunch of settings that half of us we don't even use, right? And that's what slows things down. But Enscape, if you take some of the basic imagery and then you dress it up in Photoshop, it's great. It could work out really great. So once I realized like what Enscape was capable of and how quick of a turnaround you could get some of the base images, that's when I started strictly using that Enscape or Lumion, depending on what you choose. I prefer Enscape, and then Photoshop. Photoshop is key. I've always loved Photoshop. It's one of those things that when I first started architecture school back in, first year, I would sit and watch YouTube tutorials, right, on just how to do architecture renderings. And these are like 1.5, 2-hour long tutorials that I would slow down to half speed, quarter speed, and I would just watch what these people did, you know, going through the layers, using brushes, downloading certain different brushes, and just methods. It really just comes down to technique and how to, you know, really capture painting light, portraying a space, showing shadow. Shadow is huge. And then, again, this is all like photorealism if you're trying to go that route. And there's plenty of YouTube tutorials showing different like other illustrative methods. And I know you don't have the time to do that right now. It's just one of those things that if you really commit and you really want to learn how to do it, it's available. Everything's available online. You know, maybe just spend a night, spending some days over the summer where you're just sitting down learning some of these techniques. It really just comes down to, it's the same techniques, it's just practice. You know, I spent a lot of time working on this, like between work and school, just working in Photoshop, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's just a matter of practice. And yeah, there's plenty of things that I could get better at. There's a lot of things that I know that that have to be improved if I want to get to like a really, you know, like a standard that I want to be at. But again, it just comes down to time and practice. So to make a long answer short, I use Rhino, Enscape, and Photoshop. I found those to be my essential programs that I'm always using.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue, especially the point of like these softwares, they came out at a point when like we had already been learning a certain way of doing things, and then we had learned pretty quickly like, oh wait, we can do this a lot faster. And I think what that led to was it wasn't that we kind of like had to throw away all those skills that we had been developing, but it just meant that we could do certain things faster, and it meant that we could do more faster. And that became pretty evident in this competition in particular, where the objective was to create 2 boards, which is what we have here. But there was an additional presentation for like the teams that ended up placing, which would be like a presentation on the project. And we actually hadn't made a presentation for this project, but pretty much like the 2 or 3 hours before, like once we knew that we had made it, we were able to piece together a presentation, and we were able to add new content to it, simply because we had the tool, we knew how to use it, and we knew how to tell the story. So right off the bat, we started with the one image that catches your attention and sets the scene for the project. We go into the site and looking at these 2 main driving forces for the design that were instated by the client and the brief. This is an image that we actually started from a hand sketch, and we developed in Illustrator and Photoshop, I believe. And we used it on our board, even though we didn't have really hand sketches anywhere else. And then after that, we went into our diagrams, just explaining how we got to the form, going through the floor plans. This was all just stuff we kind of explained in our presentation. But this is the part where we started to use some of the things that weren't developed yet, but we're starting to tell something different about our project that wasn't told in the board, and honestly couldn't really be told in the board because it would have been too much content and would have overloaded the board and taken away from the, I guess, the clarity of the idea. So what we were trying to achieve through these sectional cuts through the model was the sense of scale and breaking down public and private spaces, and emphasizing entrance points in the building, and also playing with light and how that comes into the spaces. And same goes for the, you can go ahead.
No, I'm just saying what's funny to note is Kyle and I were very dynamic in what we like to show. He was all about showing this, and I wasn't. I was opposed to showing this. I'm like, no, it's not complete. It's very like half-baked or undercooked, you know? And it wasn't until the presentation where just we got a comment saying like, well, I'm very happy you guys decided to put those sections in there because, you know, it portrayed exactly what Kyle just said. It's just saying like, you know, how do you convey a message of altering space and scale? So your personal decision isn't always the correct one. Like me, I'm okay with saying like, I was wrong to, you know, disagree with Kyle, because in the end, it helped portray an image or an idea of the project.
I think the beautiful thing about like this image, which is really important. So first of all, the key plan in the lower right-hand corner, that's really nice because it lets us know where in the project we're at. So it kind of builds the space in our imagination. But also, if it was completely done with all of the entourage and the vegetation, the focus would move away from the volume of the space, the detail, and the quality of light. And that's really what this is all about. In a board, this wouldn't make any sense because it would feel empty and unfinished, because you're kind of sitting with a board for a little bit longer. But in a presentation where you're there to couch what this is and say, we really wanted to look at light and openness, as soon as you kind of, you know, give context to the decision of what it is that you're giving and what you're showing us, that kind of closes the loop. And actually having that other information would be noise that you wouldn't want in the presentation, which is why I think it went over well.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
What's a funny note is if you look in the lower left-hand corner, you see there's grass coming into the sunroom or the porch, the covered porch. Just a fun little note. So,
yeah, so that's something you would notice if it was on a board, but in a presentation when you're talking over it and describing the image, like no one's gonna notice that. Yeah. And then so we were talking about like how you can turn out renderings. Like we added in, so for instance, this and this, and these are things that we never processed or really like in this one. Oh, sorry, that was one of them. This one, and this just goes to show like, you know, like this concept could be applied if you have a model that you've made and you're trying to use that model for many things. Like it doesn't have to be like a digital model, it could be a physical model or anything else really. Is like you can use it for more than it's worth. You don't just, not everything has to be to this quality of 100%, you know, through the roof, perfect rendering.
through the roof.
Through the roof. Yeah, that's all I have for that project.
Cool. So I think this might be an opportunity to open it up to questions.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from people who are.
To answer Dominique's question right off the bat, this is Enscape. I don't really use Lumion. I just found Enscape to be a little bit better of a quality, though Lumion does have a lot more versatility in terms of texturing, being able to drop in sites. Yeah.
What modeling software did you use to create this house?
So this was Rhino. And it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. When we first started, for this project, our massing was all over the place. It was, yeah.
It's because Hutten and I were working together. So Hutton's mind is like, all right, let's make this one thing that's like really clear, easy to understand, like everyone's gonna love it. And my mind's like, let's just completely explode this whole thing. Like, let's do something crazy.
And that's why it's really fun to work with someone who has a different kind of methodology. Working with him has really taught me what to do, what not to do, and that there's always something that I could learn, you know, like, I don't know.
Yeah, every project you do is about the next project.
Yeah. So check out that key plan.
Callie's got a question. Callie, your audio is not coming through.
Awesome. Okay, I got it now.
Now we got it.
You guys are obviously successful designers. Is there, for me at least, sometimes I get overwhelmed with trying to design too much and not knowing when to say stop. I know you kind of touched this in the beginning, but like, especially with school projects, like I don't know when to stop and just start like producing.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because Kyle and myself, we actually had that at the same time. Okay, so I came in the studio over at Seed. Kyle, when was this? Was this the day before?
Stewardson?
No. This
Or-
one, where
Oh, this project?
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
where
Okay, no, yeah, this is good. This is good.
so I came
So-
in like I was really. Can you go to a section really quick?
Yeah.
And I swear to God, Callie will answer your question through this story. So like this. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Can you point to what I'm about to talk about? Just that little bit of an overhang at
Yeah.
that story. Right.
I got it.
So I think I forget what I wanted to pull the shed roof back or some way.
I'll explain it. So as you can see, light is coming in right here. And I obviously come from a school of thought where you shouldn't have direct southern exposure. You shouldn't have hot spots in your building because it increases your heating loads, et cetera, et cetera. We were considering a lot of like passive principles in designing this project that weren't really a part of the brief. And I wanted to cut the roof like this right here, and then use like essentially outriggers or kind of like 45-degree angle supports to like support that cut angle there. And I was sitting in Seed, like waiting for Hutten to come in, and Seed has a clear story like right at the top of the building, and the sun was coming in and literally blinding my eyes while I was trying to work. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, we cannot do this. Like, we cannot have this light coming in. It was such a minor thing. It was one of those things that's like, you know, like it could just go over unpassed, but like a part of you is just not going to be satisfied. Like,
it was a little detail that probably, I don't know if anyone would really catch it, but like, I forget what I think we just extended the roof. I think the roof was extended.
So yeah, I think if we go to the next, hold on, let me clear that.
Anyways, I turned the corner. I couldn't even get a hello out of Kyle. I was like, "What's up, baby?" So said something along the lines of that, and he was just like, "You see this? You see the clear story?" And he like grabbed me. He's like, "We cannot do this." And I was like, "What's going on?" So, anyways, to answer your question, it was the day before the presentation where, or maybe it was like 2 days before, where we told each other, we're like, okay, this has to be the deadline that we stop designing, we stop producing. Or we stopped designing the model and we have to start producing. And that's why it was such a big surprise where I turned the corner and he was still up in arms of wanting to.
Yeah. So this was actually where it was. The original roof was like this. So we had about like a 4 or 5 foot clear story where that southern light was coming in. And then we had glazing right here. So that light would just be like completely glaring.
Yeah.
In this.
But Callie, it really comes down to knowing what you're like, how efficiently can you produce something? Like how efficiently can you produce a render?
Yeah, and also like where it's being seen in the design, especially. So I mean, it's different if you're actually building something. And this project, the original prompt for this project was that the winning design would then be built. So this was something that like I kind of cared about, and then like but it's, you know, it comes down to like where do you actually see it in the presentation, especially if it's like a hypothetical project. And like for us, you know, we showed it in this section and it worked in this section that was explaining our strategy, so it wasn't really an issue.
I think there's another important thing that I remember hearing this from one of the previous Stewardson winners, where she was it Melanie? Was that her name?
Yeah, I mean, she won.
Yeah, she won, and she did her project in like a weekend, right? And that's crazy. Like, I know I can never do that. Personally, I know I can't crank out.
She was my inspiration. I waited 5 days to do the Stewardson because of that story. I was like, I know I'm gonna overwhelm myself, so I'm gonna give myself a really small amount of time to force myself.
The thing is, one of the things she said is like, I didn't have everything figured out. I had a lot of things that weren't figured out. And she's like, for the staircase, I just put an X, right? So with that mentality is like, what should I show that is important, and what can I show that, like, what are the little details that are gonna hang me up? And essentially make the project longer than it really has to be, or what's the working process longer than it should be. So like modeling out stairs, over modeling things, like that's, once you're able to address that in a project, I think that's when you can appropriately address, all right, well then how long is it going to take me to show the things that actually matter? There's not one right answer to say, you know, give yourself this much time to work and give yourself this much time, or give yourself this much time to design and give yourself this much time to post produce. I don't know that answer. It's always going to be different. It really just comes down to knowing yourself and what you're capable of and what you're most efficient at and what you're trying to show. And
Just wanted to add on also knowing your partner.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
That was like really critical to you guys, like being able to take Kyle's craziness and turn it into a really successful like strategy. So.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting in both the, as you guys are talking about working as a team, and then also Hutten, as you're talking about working by yourself, like Hutten, you initially were saying like, it's really fun, but it's also really hard. And I think it's like, it's not like fun, like it's like, it's like fun, like it's fun because it's meaningful on a deep level. And there's like a fundamental kind of foundational enjoyment out of it. And also it's about bringing like the energy of Kyle and the rigor of Hutten. It's about like the technicalness of Kyle, right? And then the kind of like poetry and beauty that Hutten that you're bringing to it. And then when you're working by yourself, it's also about like managing those within your own self and your own process.
For sure.
So that you can have like the joy of doing it, but also like the rigor, but the energy, the kind of exuberance. You know, you want to make sure that you're like having fun drawing, but that you keep a sharp pencil, however that gets sliced.
Yeah. No, I think it's important that, I think what you said, like we have different characteristics in terms of as designers or students. And I think it's important that, you know, if someone has to work with somebody or wants to work with somebody, this is going to sound really funny, but like everyone should find their Kyle, right? Like find someone that demonstrates attributes to designing that are different than yours. And if, you know, luckily Kyle and I, we work well together, not all the time, but it's been able to make some really fun projects together. Do you recognize yourself in each other as people you might want to work with? I'm reading Carol's comment. Carol's comment. When you were in first year, did you recognize yourself in each other as people you might want to work with, or was it much later?
I'd say so.
So
Probably.
I don't think I actually talked to you until second year, maybe. I remember coming into studio and you were throwing X-Acto knives at the pinup board.
That was Derek.
It
was totally Derek.
And it was just us three. And I was kind of like, what's going on here? Like trying to work on my other stuff and then realizing, it is always Derek. Sorry, Derek. But realizing whatever you guys were doing was fun. And that's kind of like where we met each other. The first time we worked together, I don't even know, because we worked together a lot on a few different projects. But yeah, it's not something you pick up immediately. It's like I said, we worked together a few times, and that was through that process we realized what works, what doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, it just comes down to when you come up against the inevitable conflict where one person thinks you should do it one way and the other person thinks you should do it another way. How do you move past that, and how do you decide on really, like, how do you decide on what you're going to do? Because like just saying, you know, like I'm right and I'm just going to like steamroll over you and like my way is going to be the way is not a
compromise. It's Kyle and I, we solved a lot of our conflicts with wrestling matches. Definitely I'm better at wrestling. I'm just kidding. But no, it really comes down to compromise and saying like logic. There's something that you might want to do because it looks good and like that's what you're familiar with, but what makes the most sense and what's the most logical? That's what it really comes down to.
Or yeah, jumping off that, another way of putting it is like if one person wants to do it one way and another person wants to do it another way, rather than like compromising and saying, you know, like, we'll do it half this way, half that way, there's potentially a third option which neither of you are thinking of, and that oftentimes is the better solution.
Yeah. So are there any other comments or questions?
Yeah.
Jumping into, I mean, like, questions concerning Woods Hole, Stewardson. We could go through Photoshop processing.
Callie's got lots of questions.
Yeah, I'm just familiar with your work because I've been following you since like the E1027 project. But I think one thing that makes your renderings provocative are, I don't know if you use like filters or like I don't know, different adjustments to it, but
cool. I mean, yeah, no, it's a common question. It's like you're trying to get that ethereal effect. I follow a lot of different accounts on Instagram, Pinterest, and just kind of like what their aesthetic is and like how do you convey this idea of photorealism, and what are some of the techniques. So I could go through, let me share a screen. So let's see. Let's go through the below, right? This was the starting image out of the model. So you can see it's like bare bones. It's very basic. But I knew I wanted to get this angle right. Okay, that's fine. So moving into the actual Photoshop file, I'm gonna hide everything, right?
Yeah, so Hutten, one of the questions in the chat is where you start when creating a perspective in Photoshop. So would you say like the first step is choosing the right angle?
Yeah, and this wasn't the first shot. Like there was multiple iterations where I just dropped it in, and after I started working with it, I was like, I don't like this, and I went back, and I did that probably about like 2 to 3 times until I kind of finalized on this. And again, this is only a process that's 45 minutes, where you're dropping in images and then determining whether it's the right one. And again, that takes practice. But okay, if we start off with this, I'm gonna open up, this is the base file, right? Coming out of Enscape. And I knew that I wanted it to be dusk or like a dawn type feel. And I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with Alex Holgraph. If you wait just 1 second. So there's an image that I absolutely love from him, from his recent book, or his recent portfolio. Anyways, it's this project, right? This isn't the exact image, but if you go on his website or Pinterest and look at this project, you'll see like he creates a very kind of airy nature to it. And the way he plays with light, I think is just awesome. Anyways, enough of that. So I knew I wanted to get in some like internal light. So I actually re-rendered, turned down the sun, put some lights. And when I say lights in Lumion and or Enscape in Rhino, it's just taking a emissive layer and applying that to an object and strategically placing it somewhere so it's emitting light, but you don't see a direct hotspot, right? So that was put on, so that way you get kind of like this overlay. I started going through with some hue and saturation layers. Started darkening some areas. Again, brightness and contrast. This is doing an internal glow within here, like little details that, you might not notice. But these are things when I'm like zooming in to here and like just playing around thinking like, oh, well, this could get a little bit brighter. So I'll select that and throw a layer on top. Dropping in the sky. Skies are huge, right? If you could portray a sky correctly, that's like half the drama right there, right? So I don't know where this came from. Google. Overlaying another sky, and that's an overlay at 60% on top of this layer. which is also an overlay at 54. So, right, you're just kind of overlaying. And then I start painting. This layer is another overlay at 74% with kind of this orange brush, right? I'll always pick an orange color, come up here to where it's a little white, a little orange, and I'll actually make another layer, right? You want to do a soft brush, maybe put it to like 19% and see how it's starting to light up. See how I'm painting. I'm literally painting where I want light to be. And these are all concepts you can find a lot of artists do. All right, so that's the idea. And I start to take the hue and saturation down. The thing is, I always try to make the images less saturated because you could always pump them up. You could always paint color. So I like to kind of desaturate things as much as possible. So here's another filter, color filter. And again, this is all iteration. These are some things that like I'll add afterwards. Brightness. And I didn't, like these are things that are added afterwards because I may have started, I know I started with this, like where you do certain adjustments to the building. Like I want to get the building to be somewhat toned down in terms of saturation, but amped up in brightness. And then I'll come in with the foreground. So right here, I simply just sketch just the line. I just sketch it. It's nothing crazy, but I know this is where I want the path to show right here. And this is going to be the berm or the hill. So turn that back off. And this is when I start playing around with different images. Like what do I want to put on here? That's going to be the path. This is the actual berm. And again, these are just pictures that I'm taking from Google and dropping in here, looking at perspective. If you could get a picture off Google or anywhere that has the right perspective, it's huge. So, all right, now I'm actually forgetting which images I used. So you can see I still have these images in here, but I didn't delete them. And then now that I have that, obviously the light is way off. So it's just taking different adjustment layers and toning down the saturation. Again, toning down the saturation is key. Because I think when you look at things in real life is paying attention to shadow and how dark are things. Like if you look at something from a distance, like a person, you start to realize like how much shade or how much shadow actually influence what you perceive and what you can actually like determine what that image is or what that object is. So it's a lot dark. What I guess what I'm trying to say is things are darker than you might actually realize. So dropping in some mountains in the back, just to kind of add to that context. And I think I put a layer on that in terms of brightness. Starting to come in here with some grass. And it's key to like really get some good PNG grass images. And these are things that I built up over the years. Again, adding some darkness in this corner. That's another thing, ambient occlusion. So if you look around at like the corners of your ceiling, like if you look at this corner right behind me, you'll notice how there's a dark line that kind of runs along this corner. And just that little bit of detail really starts to add to photorealism and like understanding how shade and how shadow actually affects a three-dimensional object. So it's little nuanced things like that that really make an image pop. So again, that's when I start to add things like bleeding this edge between the grass and the ground. Adding some more grass up there. I actually don't know if that's final. More grass. This is a material, the material ID that comes out of Enscape. So that allows you to select images. Even though this didn't really help me in this instance, it was just quicker to do a polylasso select. This layer is another overlay. So overlay layers are huge in terms of painting. So this is when I come in here and start painting with like that orange right here in the middle to make that center pop, and come in here with maybe a dark brush. And you start painting like a vignette, right? Because you want this to be your focal point. Let's see, some more shadow, just painting. literally just painting. Again, another overlay to give it that idea where your sun's coming from this side right here. Oh, well, let's do a red so I could kind of annotate while I'm doing this. So like the sun's going to be coming from this angle, right, and shining down, or right at the horizon. So I wanted to make this darker and this brighter over here. Honestly, I have no idea what that layer did or does. Okay, so bringing in some hikers, get the, you know, scale. I didn't know where I wanted to place this guy at first. And as you can see, there's some iteration. I put him in here. And to be quite honest, I don't know why I didn't choose that person. I think it was a matter of how the light was hitting the person. This image came and I realized that it was a much more balanced light on the figure. And when you find that condition, that allows you to paint light on top of that person. So again, using some layers, layer adjustments. If you're not familiar with how to do layer adjustments to a particular layer, this is huge. So say I'll make a new image right here, right? And okay, it's this giant red dot. But let's say I want to decrease saturation on it. I'll go down here to my adjustment layers. I'll do saturation. And if I do like that, you know, it's going to affect any layer underneath it. So what's key is holding Alt and see how this little arrow kind of bumps out, and it has this like 90-degree turn down to the layer below. So that means it's only affecting this layer. And you could do that with multiple adjustment layers. And if you want to turn it off, hold Alt and click again. And again, you're clicking right in the middle of this line between the two layers. And that's how you can apply all these adjustment layers to a single image. So that makes things a little bit easier. So you're not trying to organize layers, you know, in terms of stacking, because then that makes things really confusing.
Hey Hutton, why do you use adjustment layers and not the edit image effects?
Okay, so that comes down to you don't want to work destructively. So this allows you to change it. Like if I want to come back here in order, like, you know, to say maybe do a presentation on, you know, how to set up a file, I could come in here and say, okay, I actually want to make this guy, you know, really bright, or I want to tone them down altogether. If I would say, you know, turn this off and go over here to image adjustments, saturation, this is working working destructively. I can't go back and change this later on. So let's Control Z that and keep the adjustment layers. Yeah. Okay, there we go.
Carol's asking a question. When taking images from Google, when do you have to credit your source, and when are images public property? I'll just intercede a little bit just to repeat what all of you should have heard in your Viz classes, which is that there's a great tool on Google Image Search where you can say, is the image available to be open source? There's also a lot of really great catalogs and libraries out there, like the Wikimedia Foundation. There's a couple of architectural illustrations where they've made the image quality, the images, which are high quality images, as open source. And that should be everybody's first stop in terms of being open and sharing and good with their not infringing on copyrights. And the other thing I think that's really important to point out is that all the images that Hutten has been showing us so far, you're really substantially like changing the image in a big way. So you're not really just kind of like taking a really famous image and then plopping your architecture on top of it. You're using little bits and pieces to kind of construct new meaning from little tiny bits and pieces of lots of other things. And that's a really important method of working as well. Just kind of wholesale grabbing somebody's image and just putting it together as a pastiche of a couple of pieces. Maybe you can say, well, I'm doing this for educational purposes, but in the long term, that way of working can be problematic. So making sure that you're using good quality images, open source images from good resources is always
for sure. Like if you're if you have subscription to like Mr. Cutout or some of those other providers where they provide people or different objects, that makes things a lot easier. I know I'm saying that because at work, some of the firms I worked, where they said like, okay, make sure like you're using things that, you know, it's not illegal to use a person in an image. That's essentially what they were saying. Like, we don't want to be, you know, responsible for posting someone's image and they don't approve of that. How that actually works, the logistics of it, I don't know, but it's one of those things that you should follow.
You just don't want to ever be in that position. So you want to make sure that you're either subscribing to something where you're paying to use it so that you have the rights to it, or that you're making sure that it's in the public or free domain. So that's important.
Now, with that being said, there are some Getty images out there that if you augment them enough, they don't look like the original.
Yeah, let's not talk about that. That's
Anyways,
not good practices. We're not going to do that.
With that being said, I didn't use any of those. Everything that I use is from Mr. Cutout. Okay, so going back to it, adding more shade. This is where I start to paint light on top of the person and in here. So you see, like, just where do I want the light source to be coming from? I'm starting to paint shadow. And again, that's an overlay. Even more. So coming in here with, I think this is a hard mix layer, right? A hard mix overlay at 49%. And I'm starting to paint the edge of the person's arm, their backpack, their head, just to give that extra sense of light hitting that person. And again, these are little details that if you have time to do, it's pretty fun. So once I have all that, and maybe I make a few other adjustments, I'll come in here, and this is a screen. So so Sam right here, I'll make another layer, and I'll hit Control, Alt, Shift, and E, right? And you'll see it loads a little bit, and that creates a new layer of everything below it. So I don't know why that's shifting a little bit, but yeah, okay, that was just a graphics thing. So again, Control, Alt, Shift, E, that allows you to make a copy of all the layers onto a new image. So what I do here is I'll do screen, so that way it looks like, you know, it's really bright, like a nuclear bomb's going off. But you don't want that, right? You want to tone it down, right? And I'll go over here and I'll hit blur. I'll go to blur, Gaussian blur. And this is how you get that glow effect. This is how you get that like ethereal kind of dreamlike state. So right now it's set to 7.2. I'll just crank it all the way up. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I did that. The order of operation was incorrect. So keep it up. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Tone that up. Again, I don't know why it's
in fog.
Yeah, it's like.
But I just want to point out, so Hutten, I appreciate you kind of like describing the work steps, but just to get a kind of a big picture of this, I think it's important to say working non-destructively so that you can go back and you can always adjust and change things. That does two things. Number one, it allows you to experiment, and the more you experiment, the more you practice, the more you learn, the more options you choose. It also allows you the freedom to not fear messing up. And I think that's really important too, because that's something that restricts our creativity, is when we're like, oh man, if I do this, I'm not going to be able to come back. I think the other thing to look at is that Hutton's working in a way where there's a lot of steps. So every single step is small, and that means that the weight of its impact is not huge on the image that he's making. He's working in several little steps that allows him to kind of explore and poke around and figure out, does he like it, does he not like it? The other thing that I want to reiterate that we said earlier is starting out simply and adding detail in layers. And so it's not necessarily about working an image and pushing it all the way until it's, quote, done, but rather working in steps where you can kind of go in, spend some time on it, spend some time on another image, because again, you're building a presentation. So having one really awesome image at the expense of having a bunch of images that don't feel the same versus spending time on an image that's going to get you a lot of mileage, and then also spending some other time, maybe not the same amount of time, but spending other time on the images that tell the story, And then in the example that we showed with the Kyle Hutton team before, even including some rough images that are about process or about a specific part of the story to kind of explain it. All of those in concert, kind of bringing all those together where you as a designer are the conductor of the project is really important to kind of find that balance using the tools where no one tool is going to be the answer. So you're actually kind of working by kind of floating around between images, between tools, between layers even, is a really important way of working. It keeps you measured, keeps you sane. It allows your images to kind of constantly update, change, and adapt. You know, at this point in time, you're not going to drastically change any part of your design, but you can increase the light here or diminish some of the impact of a structural piece there.
Right.
So I just wanted to see, we're kind of approaching 2 o'clock here. This is going to be a very long video for me to render, but there's a lot of good content in here. There's a lot of good questions. I'll just point out to everybody, we have another session at 5 o'clock, and we'll have Open Studio tomorrow at 11. I just wondered, Hutten and Kyle, if there's like wrap-up comments that you guys have from what you got out of this experience. Hutten is like intensively like trying to finish this rendering that he finished in January right now.
Yeah, it's not done yet. He's still working on it.
I touch it up every day. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just summarize for the. I guess I'll just speak towards the non-Hutten architecture students because Hutten definitely, you know, like he has this process and this style that is really attuned to like his way of working, but when it comes to, you know, developing your ideas, like you're not always going to have the time to like go through all of these little steps in creating a rendering. So generally speaking, you know, as Hutten was saying, desaturate, start by figuring out what you want the focus of the graphic to be. In Hutton's case, it was like the pyramid at the top of the mountain. And then from there, starting to collage over top and mock up what the whole image looks like. In particular, when I'm really strapped for time, I will literally use one texture or 2 textures to do my entire rendering or my entire image. I'll start with like a hand sketch or a really, really baseline model image, and then I'll just go over top of that. So I'll share really, really quickly. I know we're running out of time.
Really
Andrew,
quick, we're running out of time.
I made a promise to some freshmen that I would quickly do this. So like, let me start with the sketches. So these are some sketches that I was doing abroad for a certain project. As you can see, I'm starting to think about light and where I'm giving myself notes. I'm saying I want to zoom out. I want to put a person here. I'm like starting to shade, but it's not yet fully developed. And then I go into the computer. It's really not a lot. It's one background image that I took when I was at the site. There's some brick textures going behind. I have obviously scale figures that I've desaturated and brought the levels up to give them some contrast. This is not a like really long Hutten rendering, but you know it allows you to oh sorry, that's not the one I wanted.
I think what's great is it allows different people to like kind of conceptualize with their own sense of ideas, right? It's not completely fleshed out, but it allows other people to have their own sense of creativity of like, oh, well, this is the general sense, you know, let their imagination and their design sense fill in some of the blanks.
I think this is also valuable because Kyle, you're using the same tools, but in a different way, you know, and you're using them in a way that works for you. And I think that you guys touched on that multiple times during this presentation, which is like using and exploring the tools so you can find out what works for you and really finding your voice as a designer. And your voice is going to change too, and you're going to develop different skills. I think this is a great preview. Kyle, I'm going to recruit you for another digital demo to just go into this workflow. And we'll do that at we'll do it as a future demo and really get into it. But I think it'd be really valuable. Again, I just want to wrap up here. It's almost 2 o'clock. We've got to move on to some other classes. I need to give time for this video to render. Thank you to everybody for coming to our Zoom edition of Digital Demos. 5 p.m. tonight, same time, same place, same channel. We will have digital demos with Teresa. Thank you so much to Kyle, and thank you so much to Hutten for sharing this with us. You're getting hands up from everybody in the gallery view and on the chat. So thank you again, and we will be posting this out to the YouTube in a little bit as an unlisted video. Email me, direct message me on Instagram if you would like a link to that video. I will share it with Hutten, I will share it with AIAS, I will share it with Kyle, and we will disseminate it out through our design faculty as well. Thank you.
Real
Yes,
quick,
go ahead.
if anyone has any questions concerning Photoshop or graphics or anything, feel free to drop me an email or a message. If they want to review some stuff, I'd be happy to sit down and go over
There you
this.
go. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody.